Good morning everyone. Myself Dr. Varun Arora. I am working as an assistant professor in the Department of Cardiac Anesthesia. Today I am going to talk on constrictive pericarditis. So coming to the anatomy of pericardium. Pericardium is a fibroserous sac. The inner visceral layer, it is a monolayer membrane of mesothelial cells, collagen and elastin fibers. Outer parietal pericardium, it is a collagenous fibrous tissue and elastin fibrils. And between these two layers lies the pericardial space. This contains 10 to 15 ml of fluid, which is an ultrafiltrate of the plasma. Drainage of pericardial fluid is via right lymphatic duct and thoracic duct. So this space can gradually dilate to accept large volume of fluid if slowly accumulated. However, rapid fluid accumulation leads to the cardiac tamponade. So it is very important. The more important thing is rate of fluid accumulation, which determines the consequences. So the two layers of pericardium, they are joined at the level of great vessels and at the central tendon of diaphragm caudally. The vagus nerve, left tracheolaryngeal nerve and esophageal plexus innervate the pericardium along with sympathetic contribution from the stellate ganglion, first dorsum ganglion and other ganglia. The lateral course of phrenic nerve on either side of the heart is an important anatomic relationship because this nerve is encapsulated in the pericardium and this can easily be damaged during pericardiectomy. So coming to the functions of pericardium, its effects on the chambers, it limits the short-term cardiac chamber distension and facilitates the chamber coupling and diastolic interaction. Effects on the whole heart, it maintains the position of heart relatively constant, lubricates the heart and minimizes the friction, and it acts as a mechanical barrier to infection. The best characterized mechanical function is restraining the effect on cardiac volume. At low applied stress, it is very elastic, that is physiologic or subphysiologic cardiac volume, and as the stretch increases, the tissue fairly and abruptly becomes stiff and resistant to further stretch. So coming to the restrictive physiology. Restrictive physiology is characterized by impediment to ventricular filling caused by the increased ventricular stiffness in case of restricted cardiomyopathy and increased pericardial restraint in case of chronic constrictive pericarditis. This constrictive pericarditis and restrictive cardiomyopathy, they share clinical features and hemodynamic findings. Therefore, it is important to look at both. This restrictive physiology, it is characterized by the preserved systolic function, grade 3 diastolic dysfunction, elevation and equalization of diastolic pressure, dip and plateau pattern in ventricular pressure tracing, that is square root sign, which we will see in the later. So coming to the constrictive pericarditis, it is a dense fusion of the parietal and visceral pericardium that limits the diastolic filling of the heart, irrespective of the cause. Scarring of both visceral and parietal layer constraining the cardiac chamber. Causes can be tuberculosis, idiopathic or viral pericarditis, mediastinal irradiation. Coming to the percentages, as you can see, idiopathic pericarditis accounts for 40% of cases, and after coronary bypass grafting, up to 30% of cases. Tuberculosis is also an important cause, contributing to the 10% of causes. Coming to the pathology, so pericardium is thickened more than 5 mm by CT scan. It is scarred and there is loss of elasticity. So this constrictive pericarditis, it is characterized by the impaired myocardial relaxation and decreased ventricular compliance, combining to produce elevated filling pressure. So coming to the restrictive cardiomyopathy, their causes can be infiltrative like amyloidosis, sarcoidosis, and storage disorders like hemochromatosis, and non-infiltrative causes like idiopathic cardiomyopathy, and in endomyocardial causes like hypereosinophilic syndrome, carcinoid syndrome. So this is a specimen, in this specimen you can see there is a marked biatrial enlargement, and on the right side you can see there is a collagen deposition in between the cells. So classically in restrictive cardiomyopathy, the systolic function is normal, considered as normal, but diastolic dysfunction is the hallmark feature of restricted cardiomyopathy and it is associated with impaired relaxation and compliance. On 2D echo, we can see biatrial enlargement, absence of ventricular dilation and normal ventricular wall thickness and normal systolic function. In this specimen also we can see there is a marked biatrial enlargement, as we can see. So on echo, when we put the pulse wave Doppler, we can see diastolic dysfunction, like there is increased E wave due to the increased left atrial pressure. There is a decreased deceleration time less than 160 milliseconds, indicating the poorly compliant left ventricle and rapid equalization of left atrial pressure and left ventricular pressure. And there is a small A wave of short duration due to rapid increase in ventricular pressure with filling during atrial kick. And Coming to the transmetal inflow pattern, E by A is more than 2, which is characteristic of diastolic dysfunction. In this echo image, we can see there is a bilateral enlargement, as we have already discussed in echo findings, and you can see there is not much ventricular dilation, but there is marked bilateral dilation. And in this echo image, we can see there is a marked increase in E wave, and there is a decrease in deceleration time. You can see. Also, this annular velocity, we can again see there is a decrease in the annular velocity, and E by E prime ratio we see that will be increased. Clinical presentation. Clinically, it resembles the congestive states of myocardial failure and chronic liver disease. The most frequent physical signs are jugular vein distension, hepatomegaly, and ascites. Symptoms are non-specific and progress over years unless the cause is radiation, cardiac surgery, or trauma that can develop over a period of months. Venous pressure waves in pericardial constriction, they are characterized by prominent Y descent. Kussmaul signs may be present, which is paradoxical increase in venous pressure with inspiration. The elevation of systemic venous pressure accounts for some of the classic symptoms of constrictive pericarditis like hepatic congestion and peripheral edema. Significant paradoxical pulse occurs in only 1/3 of patients with chronic constrictive pericarditis. Characteristic ECG changes are P mitral, broadening of P wave, low QRS voltage, and T wave inversion. 1/4 of patients have atrial fibrillation. So now in normal pericardium, the normal pericardium can stretch to accommodate physiologic changes in cardiac volume, and this can keep up with the intrathoracic pressure. But in case of constriction, this pericardium is inelastic, which results in minimal ability to adapt to volume changes, and the cardiac filling is impeded by the external force, that is constriction. So entry and exit of external volume is handled by enhanced ventricular interdependence. This is exaggerated coupling. Pericardial space has no communication with intrathoracic pressure change. This we will discuss. In normal pericardium, with a normal pericardium, intrathoracic pressure decreases during inspiration, leading to the increase in venous return to the right heart and transient decreases in right ventricular chamber size. Because normal pericardium accommodates the increased venous return by expanding, this increase in venous return does not impair the left ventricular filling or influences to a bare minimum. In case of constriction, upper limit of cardiac volume is constrained, intrathoracic pressure is not transmitted to the heart chamber, pericardium does not expand to accommodate increased venous return to the right heart during inspiration, and this pulmonary capillary wedge pressure falls, but not the left ventricular pressure in inspiration, leading to the decrease in left ventricular volume. Ventricular filling thrives on interdependence, and compression does not occur until the cardiac volume approximates that of pericardium, which begins in mid-diastole. Early diastolic filling is even more rapid than normal. Ventricular filling occurs in early diastole with little or no filling subsequently, and the stroke volumes are reduced. So normally in inspiration there is a negative intrathoracic pressure, and this pressure is transmitted thoroughly. But in case of this constriction, there is a normally on the right side there is a decrease in the pressure and decrease in the flow, and on the left side there is a decrease in the pressure and decrease in the flow. Now coming to the pathophysiology, there is a marked restriction of filling, ventricular interdependence, and there is failure of transmission of intrathoracic pressure to the intracardiac chamber. So physiologic effect is produced by the constrictive pericardium. There is a gradual development of systemic and pulmonary venous hypertension, atrial pressures 10 to 18 mm mercury, that is systemic venous congestion. At 18 to 30 mm mercury, there is effort dyspnea and orthopnea. Due to the fall in stroke volume, there is increased heart rate, systemic vascular resistance, and inability to augment cardiac output during exercise, leading to the fatigue. So now coming to the ventricular interdependence. Filling of one ventricle limits the simultaneous filling of other ventricle due to the shared mechanical constraint. Coupled constraint, greater ventricular interdependence, and uncoupled constraint, modest interdependence, that is predominant effect on the thin-walled right ventricle. So normally, as we have already discussed, with normal inspiration, there is a decrease, negative intrathoracic pressure is transmitted to throughout the left ventricles. But in case of ventricular interdependence, what occurs during inspiration? Because the left ventricular pressure is decreased, so the septum shifts towards the left ventricle, more filling of the right ventricle occurs, and in case of expiration, there is more filling of the left ventricle, leading to the septum shift towards the right ventricle. So we can see on the left side, on inspiration there is a shift of ventricular septum towards the left ventricle, and on expiration, that is in the right side, there is a shift of ventricular septum towards the right ventricle. So one filling of one ventricle limits the filling of other ventricle. So as we have already discussed, this inspirated decrease in intrathoracic pressure is transmitted to all the cardiac chamber. There is a decrease in pressure in pulmonary veins and left ventricle, and decrease in pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is accompanied by the corresponding decrease in the left ventricle pressure, and there is a gradient that drives the left ventricle filling is maintained. So respiratory variation with inspiration, intrathoracic pressure falls, as does the pressure in pulmonary vasculature. The thickened pericardium prevents the transmission of this pressure decrease to the ventricle. Therefore, filling of the left ventricle decreases just after the inspiration, and this is due to the fall in pressure within the pulmonary vasculature. Because intercardiac space is fixed, decrease in filling pressure to the left ventricle allows the increased filling in the right ventricle, and this results in a shift in ventricle septum into the left ventricle during inspiration and decrease in hepatic vein diastolic flow. So, in constrictive pericarditis, there is a rigid scarred pericardium which encircles the heart. Systolic contraction is normal, inhibits the diastolic filling of both ventricles, and due to the decrease in stroke volume, there is a decrease in cardiac output, hypertension or shock, and leading to the reflex tachycardia. And because of increased venous pressure, there is in systemic there is increase in jugular venous pressure, hepatomegaly, ascites, and peripheral edema, and due to pulmonary congestion, there occurs rales. So coming to the CP waveform, there is a M-shaped contour. There is a prominent X and Y descent, that is Frederick sign, and Y descent is prominent as the ventricle filling is unimpeded during the early diastole, and this is interrupted by rapid increase in pressure as the filling is impeded by constrictive pericardium. The ventricular pressure curve exhibits the square root sign, which we will discuss next. Kussmaul's sign is usually positive. So this is right atrial pressure tracing in a patient with constrictive pericarditis, and you can see the Y descent is prominent in these patients, and rather than normal fall in mean pressure during the inspiration, there is an increase noted. This is called as positive Kussmaul sign. You can see here. So now coming to the so normally the left ventricular diastolic and wedge pressure, they move in synchrony during the respiration, such that diastolic gradient from wedge to LV remains constant. In case of constrictive pericarditis, negative intrathoracic pressure pulls the wedge pressure below the left ventricular diastolic, with the converse occurring during expiration. This is called as intrathoracic intercardiac dissociation, and this is a sensitive and specific sign of constrictive pericarditis. So coming to the, as a result of increased ventricular interdependence, the systolic area under the right ventricular pressure tracing increases during inspiration, while the left ventricular systolic area decreases. This is shown by the arrow. The opposite occurs during expiration. So in cardiac catheterization, there is an increased right atrial pressure and increased left atrial pressure, and normally the LV-EDP is more than RV-EDP by more than equal to 5 mm mercury. So ventricular diastolic waveform, square root sign, it is a rapid dip and early plateau in diastolic ventricular pressure, indicating the filling of poorly compliant ventricle and rapid equalization of left atrial and ventricular pressure. And in atrial pressure waveform, M shape or W shape can be seen. It is due to prominent A and V wave and rapid X and Y descent due to the increased left atrial pressure. Increased LV-EDP leads to the pulmonary venous hypertension and pulmonary arterial systolic pressure more than 50 mm mercury. So differentiating the restrictive cardiomyopathy and constrictive pericarditis is important because their treatments are different. So as we have already discussed, this square root sign. In both restrictive cardiomyopathy and constrictive pericarditis, there is an increase in the left ventricular and diastolic pressure. In restrictive cardiomyopathy, increased left ventricular and diastolic pressure due to the stiffened myocardium, and in case of constrictive pericarditis, increased left ventricular and diastolic pressure due to the constraint of stiff pericardium. And on cardiac catheterization, in restrictive cardiomyopathy, LV-EDP is more than RV-EDP by more than equal to 5 mm mercury. This is due to the difference in ventricular compliance. In case of constrictive pericarditis, left ventricular and diastolic pressure and right ventricular and diastolic pressure both are increased and equal. In case of constrictive pericarditis, ventricular interdependence is increased. This is because stiff and thickened ventricle constrains the total cardiac volume. Since pericardial shell affects the dissociation between intrathoracic and intercardiac pressure, decreased filling of left ventricle during inspiration is matched by increased right-sided filling. So again, comparing the restrictive cardiomyopathy and constrictive pericarditis, as you can see. Coming to the investigations, cardiomegaly demonstrated on chest X-ray is non-specific, whereas pericardial calcification is sometimes appreciated in only less than 30% of cases. although it is less common than in the past with decreased incidence of tuberculosis. Although calcification is very specific for constrictive pericarditis, it is not very sensitive. CT scan and MRI may show thickened pericardium of constrictive pericarditis. However, patients with surgically proven constrictive pericarditis may have normal appearing pericardium with imaging tests in 28% of individuals. So, echocardic evaluation of constrictive pericarditis, it is a preferred modality for assessing the pericardium and pericardial disease. The mean normal pericardium thickness in adults is 1.2 plus minus 0.8 mm mercury. A pericardial thickness more than 3.5 mm indicates pathological thickening, whereas any thickness of pericardium more than 6 mm is specific for pericardial constriction. CT, this echo is less reliable than MR or CT for pericardial thickening, calcification, constriction, but it is still used as the initial diagnostic test, and it is recommended by the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association. Coming to the echo M mode, in constriction septum there is abnormal rapid movement and notching in early diastole, and posterior LV wall, abrupt posterior motion in early diastole and flattening in the remaining diastole. IVC and hepatic vein dilation can be seen on echo M mode. So, in 2D echo, increased echogenicity of the pericardium from thickening may see effusion, that is in case of effusive constrictive pericarditis. Septal bounce, abrupt septal shift towards the left ventricle in early diastole and bounce back towards the right ventricle following atrial contraction. Echo Doppler, as we have already seen previously also, on transmitral inflow pattern in constriction, E wave is much more than A wave, sometimes up to more than 2. RV and LV inflow show prominent E wave due to the rapid early diastolic filling. There is a short deceleration time of E wave as the filling abruptly stops. Small A wave as little filling occurs in late diastole following the atrial contraction. E by A ratio more than 2, deceleration time less than 160 millisecond, and isovolemic relaxation time less than 60 millisecond. And coming to the respiratory mitral inflow velocity, in constrictive pericarditis, mitral peak E velocity more than 25% increase in expiration by pulse wave Doppler imaging at the mitral valve leaflet shows inspiratory decrease and expiratory increase of early inflow velocity, that is E wave, as you can see in these tracings also. On pulse wave Doppler within the hepatic vein, it shows flow reversal during the expiration. On right heart catheterization, abnormalities in the right atrial tracing, M wave or W wave can be seen in both pericardial constriction and restrictive cardiomyopathy, although this also can be seen in right ventricular ischemia or congestive heart failure. So, what is the difference? Inspiratory rise or lack of decrease in RA pressure in constrictive pericarditis, Kussmaul sign. Normal respiratory variation in mean right atrial pressure is seen in restrictive cardiomyopathy. As you can see in this figure, there is an increase in the pressure during the inspiration. RA pressure is elevated, M or W configuration, Kussmaul sign, that is inspiratory increase. There is a equalization pressure less than 5 mm mercury difference between the mean right ventricular diastolic, pulmonary artery diastolic, pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, left ventricular diastolic and pericardial pressure in constrictive pericarditis. It is diagnostic for constrictive pericarditis. It is also seen in tamponade. As you can see in this figure, there is equalization of diastolic pressure. This is a dip and plateau sign. Coming to the catheterization, there is a dip and plateau pattern in diastolic waveform, that is square root sign, in case of constrictive pericarditis, restrictive cardiomyopathy or right ventricular ischemia. As you can see in this figure also, there is a you can clearly see square root sign here. So to differentiate the two at catheterization in constrictive pericarditis and restrictive cardiomyopathy, in constriction, right ventricular systolic pressure is less than 35 to 40 mm mercury, and right ventricular end diastolic pressure and ratio to the right ventricular systolic pressure is more than 1/3, and the difference between left ventricular end diastolic pressure and right ventricular end diastolic pressure less than 5 mm mercury. This is in case of constriction. In case of restrictive cardiomyopathy, pulmonary artery systolic pressure, right ventricular systolic pressure is very high, more than 55 to 60 mm mercury, and the ratio of RV-EDP by RV-SP is less than 1/3, and the difference between LV-EDP and RV-EDP is more than 3 to 5 mm mercury. So this is an important differentiating feature at cardiac catheterization. To sum up, as we have already discussed these features, we have already discussed about the jugular passive waveform, and in the echo findings like mitral or pattern we have already discussed. we have already discussed. So now coming to the surgical considerations for pericardial disease. Pericardiectomy is done for recurrent pericardial effusion and constrictive pericarditis, which is refractory to conservative therapy. Pericardiectomy for constrictive pericarditis is often a surgical challenge with an operative mortality of 5.9% to 11.9% and the 5-year survival rate of 78%. The occurrence of tricuspid regurgitation may occur similar to constrictive pericarditis with signs of right-sided heart failure and volume overload. Persistent low cardiac output immediately after pericardiectomy is a major cause of morbidity and mortality, occurring in 14 to 28% of patients in the immediate postoperative period. Examination of patients after pericardiectomy for constrictive pericarditis found that significant number of patients had abnormal left ventricular contractility and relaxation abnormalities. Determination of myocardial function is important as a marker of patient outcome and the need for inotropic support. Although patients with cardiac tamponade usually improve clinically once the pericardium is opened, improvement is not always apparent immediately after pericardiectomy for patients with constrictive pericarditis. Noticeable improvement in cardiac function may take weeks. However, 90% of patients will experience relief of symptoms postoperatively. Median sternotomy provides excellent exposure and access for pericardiectomy, but thoracotomy in the left anterolateral position is also used. Total pericardiectomy was found to result in superior outcome compared with partial pericardiectomy in retrospective review. Removal of adherent and scarred pericardium to release both right ventricle and left ventricle involves extensive manipulation of the heart and hemodynamic instability. The decision to use cardiopulmonary bypass is influenced by the surgeon's confidence in being able to achieve complete pericardial excision with acceptable hemodynamic stability. A more aggressive approach to pericardiectomy with cardiopulmonary bypass has increased over the years as survival has improved. However, good results have been reported with and without cardiopulmonary bypass. The use of cardiopulmonary bypass entails full heparinization and may exacerbate blood loss from the many exposed cardiac surfaces. Further, prolonged cardiopulmonary bypass in debilitated patients contributes to the early mortality associated with pericardiectomy. An especially high-risk group of patients undergoing pericardiectomy are those with post-radiation constrictive pericarditis. They not only suffer from effects of radiation on the myocardium that may create a more sustained restrictive effect even after pericardiectomy, but they also suffer from radiation-induced pulmonary dysfunction. Coming to the anesthetic considerations, anesthetic goals for managing the patient with constrictive pericarditis for pericardiectomy include minimizing bradycardia, minimizing myocardial depression, and minimizing the decrease in P load and afterload. Coming to the monitoring considerations include arterial and central venous pressure catheter. One femoral site should be reserved for femoral cannulation if necessary to emergently initiate cardiopulmonary bypass. Pulmonary artery catheter monitoring is often used because of the risk of low cardiac output syndrome postoperatively. Low cardiac output syndrome develops in subset of patients with constrictive pericarditis irrespective of approach or extent of pericardiectomy. Low cardiac output, hypertension and arrhythmia, atrial ventricular are common during chest dissection. Because of limited and fixed ventricular diastolic filling, cardiac output becomes rate dependent. If myocardial function or heart rate is decreased, then beta agonist or pacing will improve cardiac output. Catastrophic hemorrhage can occur suddenly if the atrium or ventricle is perforated, necessitating the adequate central venous access. Damage to the coronary artery can also occur during dissection, so careful monitoring of the ECG for signs of ischemia is prudent. Pericardiectomy via left anterior thoracotomy requires close monitoring of oxygenation because left lung is severely compressed during dissection. Currently, anesthetic techniques is based on achieving early extubation similar to other cardiac surgical cases, assuming the acceptable hemostasis and hemodynamic parameters. Thank you.